So many people are looking to live happier, more stress-free lives. We provide interviews from mental health experts across various fields because we know finding quality information isn't always easy. Let's find more sanity together. Hello and welcome back, everybody, to Sanity Podcast. I have a very special guest for me today. I sometimes say half of all I know from Dr. Robert Leahy, Bob Leahy. Quick introduction. Dr. Leahy is the director of the American Institute for Cognitive Therapy in New York City and clinical professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. He is also the associate editor of the International Journal of Cognitive Therapy and is past president of the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies, the International Association for Cognitive Psychotherapy, and the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies. But wait, there's more. He is a recipient of the Aaron T. Beck Award from the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies, is author and editor of 29 books for mental health professionals, including his new book, If Only, and The Worry Cure, which is an amazing book. If you haven't read The Worry Cure, you should go buy it right now while you're listening. And his books are so impressive, they've been translated into 21 different languages. That's a lot of readers, Bob. He's been featured in the New York Times, Sunday Magazine, Forbes, Fortune, Newsweek, Psychology Today, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Redbook, Shape, Women's Health, Self Magazine, USA Today Magazine, and many others. He's also been on national and local radio, such as BBC, NPR, 2020, Good Morning America, and The Early Show. Okay, have I missed anything that I should be introducing you on?
It sounds like you covered just about everything.
Fantastic. All right. So you spent a considerable amount of time writing a book about regret.
Right.
What got you on this train of regret?
Well, first, thank you, Jason, for having me on. It's good to see you again. What I realized is that many of my patients, friends, family members, even myself at times have had regret. And that even though cognitive behavior therapy seems to address a lot of issues in anxiety and depression, there really wasn't anything out there that did a deep dive into regret, really trying to understand regret and give us the tools to deal with regret. So I'm always looking for a challenge. I've written books on worry and on jealousy and on emotions in general. So I thought this would be an interesting topic. I've also realized for a number of years, I've written a number of chapters and articles on how people go about making decisions. And regret is potentially a part of any decision that we could make. So I can see that people who are depressed often dwell on their past decisions, labeling themselves as a failure, that their regret becomes pervasive and psychologically disabling. So it seemed like a challenge, and I hope that the book is useful to people. I think it can be.
Yeah, one of my, I don't know if you say it's a complaint, but observations about the empirically supported treatment field is that we focus a lot on depression and anxiety, particularly anxiety, but not too many people are spearing the forefront of regret, jealousy, other negative emotions that impact people on a daily basis that people might be struggling with or might be impacting into their depression, anxiety, or their just general unhappiness. So what opened, I guess, your eyes to say, well, yeah, depression, anxiety is important, but why not focus on these other things?
Well, I guess my sense is that that we have a lot of really excellent theories and models of treatment, like the Beck cognitive model, the acceptance and commitment model, the behavioral model, mindfulness model. I think what people tend to do, they start with their model and then they apply it to an emotion like anxiety. And that's very useful. But there are these complicated emotions that people have worldwide, like jealousy and envy, regret, ambivalence, resentment. Uh, these kinds of emotions really plague people. And what I do, Jason, I start with the emotion and then I try to make sense of the
Mm.
emotion. How did this emotion evolve? Like, how did jealousy evolve? Why is it that jealousy seems to be a fairly common emotion, not only among humans, but among animals? Um, is there an evolutionary basis of this emotion? And then how does this emotion manifest itself? What are the thought patterns with the emotion, the behavioral, the interpersonal patterns with the emotion? How could it be useful? So if you take regret, a lot of people will say, "Well, I don't regret anything. I did what I did, and I just move on." I guess my view of that is that regret is a way in which we learn from mistakes, and
Hmm.
if we don't have that pang of regret to say, what was wrong with me that I thought that or I did that, how do we learn from our mistakes? So regret, I argue that regret can be a very painful emotion. It can be almost like emotionally disabling, where people ruminate and criticize themselves. But it could also be productive, and I could talk a bit about that as well.
Um, but isn't regret like a negative emotion? Don't people want to just not? It's bad, right? Like get rid of regret, get rid of jealousy, get rid of greed. Like we shouldn't be feeling all these bad
Yeah.
things, right?
Well, I know a lot of people will say that, but let me suggest a number of things that make me think that regret is not always a bad emotion. It can be a painful and unpleasant emotion, just like physical pain can be, or hunger or thirst can be
Hmm.
painful, unpleasant, but they're there for a reason. So, for example, what do we know about people who seem to lack the ability to regret? People who are very impulsive uh, act as if they won't regret it. People who yell and scream or overdrink or misuse drugs or who are aggressive, they act in ways in which they do not anticipate regret. People who are manic, if you've ever dealt with a person in a manic phase, it's almost as if they think they can get away with anything. People who ride motorcycles without helmets on I-95,
Hmm.
which I'm sure you've seen. These are
Oh
people who
yes.
don't anticipate ending up in the ICU with serious head injuries. So there are people who have a deficit of regret. The other thing that's interesting, Jason, is that the research on children shows that children at about the age of 6 or 7 first begin expressing and experiencing regret. And the kids who express regret are actually better at making decisions and better at regulating their behavior. It's because they anticipate that if I do that, I'm going to regret it. And so they do a mental rehearsal and think, well, that's not going to be a good plan. So I won't do that. And so they're better at making decisions, better at regulating their behaviors. So there's a productive aspect of regret.
And just like all of our negative emotions, there's no bad emotion. All of our negative emotions have some sort of reason why they're there. They're meant to propel us to do something healthy, hopefully,
Right. Yeah.
most
I
of the
mean,
time.
emotions evolve because they motivate us, they get us to do things, or they get us to avoid things. So I don't take a Pollyannish view of regret and think, oh, you should never regret, or that regret is just a passing emotion, because it can be disabling. And so it's having regret about the right things, the right proportion, and using it in the right way. And I think that's an important thing to say to somebody, don't ever regret anything, is really giving a person almost like permission to do whatever they want without considering the outcome, the consequences. And we don't want uh, people to be taking unnecessary risks. Uh, so that's where regret comes in. It's a productive emotion if you use it to motivate yourself to improve your behavior, but it becomes unproductive when you ruminate about it, you criticize yourself, and you get stuck and you don't take reasonable chances. You are simply avoid and remain passive and isolated. And I think a lot of people who are depressed are suffering from a lot of regret.
Mm-hmm. And avoidance of our emotions is a huge cause of having a pathological degree of emotion, including avoiding your regret.
Right. Like, for example, in one of the chapters in my book, If Only, I describe guilt as a potentially uh, adaptive emotion. And I mean, guilt is regret on steroids. A person says, "Oh, I feel, I shouldn't have done that," and then I feel terrible about it, and that sort of thing. So, how could guilt be productive? Let's just imagine this: you're a single person, and uh, they're cutting the grass outside here. You're a single person, and you're looking for a partner, a life partner. Um, that you the person says, Jason, I really like you, but I want to tell you I'm incapable of ever experiencing regret, guilt, or shame. Would you feel like you could trust this person? Do you think that you would want to
That
make a
sounds like a
lifetime?
big red flag to me.
Yeah, so you don't want somebody who says, I feel guilty about everything, but you want somebody who has that ability to control their behavior because they think, well, that would be the wrong thing. And I would feel bad if I did that to Jason. And what's interesting is they find in research that people who express guilt are better able to work in groups in a business environment. They're better able to get along with people. People trust them more. People who are able to express their guilt and ask for an apology, to sincerely communicate that they really feel bad about what they've done, those people are more likely to maintain or heal the relationships that they have. So there are ways in which these emotions that we tend to think are really bad emotions, we should never have them, that we can use them in a productive way at times. It's not an all or nothing thing. It's not like regret is always bad. It's not always good. It's the right amount of regret for the right reasons at the right time, expressed in the right way.
Mm-hmm. So it's like a tool. If it's used correctly, that's
Yeah,
fantastic. If it's used incorrectly, then that's not so
yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so it sounds like regret goes forwards and it goes backwards. Meaning, one, if we predict that we're going to have regret in the future, it helps us modulate our behavior so we don't do
yeah.
something bad. And then if we do something bad,
Right.
the regret
Yeah,
teaches us a lesson so we don't do
yeah,
it again. Or
yeah,
hopefully, that's what the regret does.
yeah. Exactly. And what's interesting is um, that we tend to think that if we take a new action, uh, we're gonna regret it more than if we stay where we are. So making a change, we tend to anticipate more regret than staying where we are. Um, but in the long term, what the research shows is that people regret more what they chose not to do. They
Yes.
chose not to pursue a relationship or a job or be assertive or tell somebody they love them or broke off from a relationship. So in the long term, people regret what they did not do. Um, and we find this throughout all the cultures that have been studied. It's not just an American culture. This kind of regretting more what I did not do. But we can anticipate regret about the future. Like if I have too much spicy food, I may not be able to sleep so well. I might feel ill, whatever. So I can anticipate that regret, um, or
Mm-hmm.
regret about things I did in the past. Uh, People often think regret is about what you did in the past, but it's actually regret about what you could or could not do.
Okay. Um, so there's some steps that you take in order to analyze regret in your new book. Like I think you propose like a 5 or 6 step model. Um, and I have them here to pull up. And I was just wondering, the importance of going through these steps. Give me just 1 second here. Okay, so it was first step, normalize that we all make mistakes. Focus on what you can learn, not on what you did wrong. Number 3 is what were you thinking when you made the decision? Number 4 was what were you ignoring when you made the mistake? How can you use the information you've gathered, and how can you avoid making this mistake in the future? So you had said before that you take the emotion, you try to understand it, and then you work from that to figure out how it's useful and then how to make it a therapeutic tool. So what made you come up with this list as a proposed way to handle regret?
Well, what I notice is that there's some people who are able to express that they realize they made the wrong decision and they learn from it. And then there are other people who keep making the wrong decision over and over. And what's interesting, Jason, is that some people are good decision makers make mistakes. Good decision makers make bad decisions. And I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. This is part of normalizing regret. No matter what you do, you're going to make a bad decision at some point, or the outcome is going to be something you don't want. So I would first normalize making mistakes. And the second thing I would say, what did you learn from a mistake? My view is never waste a good mistake. Like if you say something to your partner and you realize it was unkind or unnecessary, you can learn from that mistake and become a better partner. The people who don't learn from mistakes and keep justifying their mistakes, those are the people who actually, in the long term, have more reason to regret. So you can look at people who misuse drugs or alcohol or overspend money, get into a great deal of debt, or don't get the work done, or they're constantly late. These are people who make mistakes. We all do. We're all going to make those kinds of mistakes at times. But do we learn from it? I think the other thing that I've learned from my own experience, especially when I was a younger man, was to learn from the mistakes of other people. So what I observed is that, people I knew in college or in my youth, people were misusing drugs or over drinking. And I thought, gee, I don't want to end up like that. So rather than my going out and carrying out the experiment of over drinking or misusing drugs or, whatever, I decided I'm going to learn from their mistakes. I'm going to learn from the regrets they should have had. And I think that's, if you want to learn how to be more successful, look at the people who are not successful in the mistakes that they made.
So we could observe, vicariously learn from other people and say, what did they do,
right,
whether they regret it or not, and think, man, I probably should have regretted that, and then use that in order to teach yourself, which is, an excellent tool that I hope most people do. But a lot of people, when they look back at their regret, they have the shoulda, woulda, coulda. I should have done this differently. I should have went down that road. I shouldn't have went to that bar. I shouldn't have dated that person. I shouldn't have. How helpful is that sort of thinking?
So, what you're describing is what I would call hindsight bias. Like I should have known the stock market's going to crash, or I should have known my partner would not be the person I thought they were going to be, or I should have this. But I think a lot of times when we sit back on Monday to predict the game, the outcome of the game on Sunday, we don't realize that when we first made our decision with that relationship or that investment or whatever it was, we were operating under uncertainty. We didn't have all the information. We thought our decision was a good decision. And so, people often think, after they made a decision, they see the outcome. Oh, I should have known differently. I'm thinking about, somebody I knew who married a man who, initially seemed like a really decent person, but over the years, developed a pretty difficult alcoholism and became verbally abusive. That kind, I should have known he was like that. When she first met him, he was the nicest guy in the world, and he was supportive and he was affectionate, generous, the whole thing. So I would question, what information were you operating on when you initially made that decision? Having said that, there's always something to learn from your decisions. I mean, you can think about decisions as experiments. So, for example, if somebody makes a decision about a relationship simply based on looks, rather than character or personality or social skills or values, if you make a decision simply based on looks, then you might end up with somebody who's attractive, but not a good partner. Attractive people can be good partners, but that's not the equivalent. So learning from your decisions, learning from your mistakes, can be an important thing. Like, what was I basing that decision on? Was I simply making a decision out of loneliness or desperation, or based on looks, or being impulsive? And that kind of learning experience, that's like an experiment. What was the outcome of the experiment? What am I going to do in the future? And I would normalize making the mistakes, because a lot of times people, when they have a regret, they go to the next step, which is self-criticism. And of course, you could always regret having too much regret. You can spend 10 years regretting and then realize after 10 years that was a waste of time, and then regret that you regretted for 10 years. So I think of regret as a step one. What did I learn from it? What information was I using making the decision? What outcomes was I expecting? What would I do differently in the future?
So way back in grad school, when I was a youngling, I was in a research lab. We were looking and coding narratives of people that went through an adverse event or a tough time. And we would code, if it was counterfactual thinking, which is a woulda, coulda, shoulda, like I'm basing my information off of something I didn't know at the time. Or we would code for if it was something that they said they knew and they did it anyway. And so I'm sitting here thinking a lot of times, and I could think of myself when I was a teenager, I know I shouldn't do it. I mean, even older, even now, I know I shouldn't do this, but I feel peer pressure. I'm too anxious. I'm too whatever. I'm too scared not to do it anyway. And now I regret doing that thing. How do you handle the regret when you know you shouldn't have done it, but you didn't have the fortitude not to do it?
Right. Yeah. So one thing I describe in the book is thinking about yourself as multiple selves. So I'm Bob Leahy in the past, Bob Leahy today, Bob Leahy in the future. And so a lot of times we make impulsive decisions about, making a decision to feel good for the next hour or the next 5 minutes. So somebody, let's say, who abuses alcohol or drugs or other kinds of impulsive types of behaviors, that person's making a decision for the immediate self, for how I'm going to feel in the next 5 minutes or the next hour. So you can look at, were you making a decision based on the immediate self, short-term gratification, or to avoid an emotion. I talk about making a decision for the future self. And here's what's interesting, Jason, about the research on this. That when half the people who are prescribed medication for high blood pressure end up not taking the medication a year later. So they put themselves at risk for stroke or whatever. And it's one study when they've asked people, think about yourself in a wheelchair. You had a stroke, you're disabled, you paralyzed partly, whatever, and think about that as a possible outcome of not taking the medication. There's a significant increase in medication compliance or future savings. I mean, one of the problems that a lot of people experience is that they don't have a plan for saving for the future. So when they say to people that say 30 years old, I want you to think about yourself when you're 65 and at your current rate of savings, how you're going to live at 65. And picture yourself as an older person with very limited assets. When they ask them to think about their future self, they make better decisions about investment. They begin, having a forced savings plan. So one way of thinking about what you're describing is you're probably making decision for your emotions at the present moment rather than your future self. So one technique I use in therapy is have the patient play the role of the future self, giving advice to the present self. So I'll be the present self. I just eat as much as I want and drink a lot and act out and don't do my work or whatever. And then the future self has to advise the current self. That allows us to get a better distance to make smarter decisions about the future self. The other thing that we tend to do, in the way you described it, is we tend to predict our emotions in the future. Like, if I do this, it's going to be extremely unpleasant. It's what's called by researchers affective forecasting. But what it really is predicting my emotions in the future. And we know that something like in one study by Gilbert at Harvard, that people predicted their regret. They predicted 70% regret, and they experienced about 25 or 30% regret. So they're predicting many more regrets or negative emotions than they have. The other thing is sometimes you have to go through it to get past it. So I know that you exercise a lot and you're quite fit. I try to exercise every day. And my view about exercise is that you have to make it a habit to do what you don't want to do so you can get to be where you want to be. And if you practice what I call constructive discomfort, doing the hard things on a daily basis, you're going to make much more progress. And making progress is not about necessarily feeling a pleasant emotion. It's about feeling effective. And so if you do the hard things and you think about how am I going to feel after the exercise or after I get my work done or after I make that engage in that difficult and challenging behavior, I'll probably feel more effective. I'll feel on top of things. Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do.
Yes, and that's a huge thing. I mean, you that was one big thing that you had taught me, and that's one thing that I talk to my clients about all the time. That the people that are good at doing things they don't want to do, tend to be able to be more successful in managing their lives, right? Because there's a lot of things that we don't want to do, which are very helpful to us. I don't feel like getting on my spin bike for 45 minutes every, not every day, 5 days a week, but I do it so I can live longer, be healthier, manage my weight, this, that, and the other. But it's not easy.
Yeah, there are two things. There are two things that I think are relevant to that. They're related to each other. One is emotional perfectionism, which is that I really want to have pleasant emotions. I want to feel. One of the ways of overcoming anxiety is to do things that make you anxious. So, we know from the research on exposure that, the way for somebody to overcome a phobia or overcome obsessive compulsive disorder is to actually do something that makes them anxious. And actually eliciting that anxiety is almost necessary to making progress. It's the willingness to do the things that make you anxious. And we tend to think we have to feel pleasurable, happy, running after happiness all the time is something that will make you miserable because you're not going to be happy all the time. And I think this plays into regret because, let's say somebody gets married or they take a new job or whatever, and they're not happy all the time. It's like, happily ever after. It's a fairy tale. It's like working on things ever after. That's what married life is really about, or that's what a relationship, or that's what work is about. It's working at it on a regular basis. I think the other thing that plays into our expectations and our regret is what I call existential perfectionism, which is that I have to have this wonderful life and be fulfilled all the time, and everything has to be great and all of that. And one of the things about dealing with an outcome, say in a relationship or at work or whatever it might be, is not existential perfectionism. It's living in the real world, and the real world is filled with noise. It's a matter of trade-offs. Like if you live I'm up in Connecticut right now, but we live in New York City. If you're in New York City, there are trade-offs. There's a lot of noise, a lot of people, a lot of traffic. Things are more expensive, crowds, and the whole thing. But it's New York. It's a great city, so you consider the balance and the trade-offs. When people deal with the outcomes, the people have a hard time hold on to the expectation. Like, I expected that my partner would be this way, and he or she is not 100% that way. So a lot of people regret just keep demanding that expectation. I want you to be the person I thought you were, as opposed to I'm going to accommodate to the person that you are. So Jason, you live in New York City. If you go out on 2nd Avenue to get a downtown bus, you'll see a little bus schedule. That bus is going to arrive at 10:12, at 10:24, at 10:36. The only people who look at that bus schedule are tourists, because nobody who lives in New York thinks the bus is going to arrive at any of these times. You'll see a caravan of the same bus coming down 2nd Avenue. And so what I'm saying is that one way of dealing with regret is to have flexible preferences and readjust your expectation. Flexible preferences is that, I would like this particular thing, but I'm willing to accept this, I'm willing to accept that. Flexible preferences. And the other part of it is not that there's a whole area of research on this kind of existential, inflexible expectation called the maximizer. The concept that Herbert Simon, who got the Nobel Prize in economics back about 70 years ago, came up with this idea of maximizers, people who want the very, very best. I want absolutely the best partner. I want the best food. I want the best house, best car, whatever it is. And what these maximizers do is they demand tremendous amount of information. They take forever to make a decision, and they're dissatisfied with the outcomes because they're always compared it to what they could imagine the best would be. The alternative is what I would call a satisfier. The satisfier is willing to be more flexible. I prefer 100%, but I could be satisfied with 80%. I don't need 90%. I could be satisfied with that. Those people tend to be more satisfied with their decisions, have less regret, easier to make a decision. They don't demand as much information. And even in the cases where maximizers actually obtain a better outcome than a satisfier, even when they get a better outcome objectively, they're less satisfied with the better outcome than the satisfier. So the question would be in life, are you always chasing after the Holy Grail? Do you always want the 100%? In which case you'll be trading up. People often say, well, I'm ambivalent about this person. Should I get married to them? And what if somebody else comes along who's better? I mean, how many times have you heard that or thought that? What if somebody comes around who's better? Well, there are 5.5, 6 billion people in the world. How likely is it that you've chosen the absolute best person in the world, and they've chosen you as the absolute best person in the world? So this kind of, somebody else could come along that's better. So what? So what some people do, they keep thinking, well, I'm going to put off getting married or make a commitment because somebody could come around that's better. That's chasing after a receding reference. I need better, 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 better. And you see these people, they're on their 3rd or 4th marriages and they're still miserable. chasing after the receding reference point, as opposed to aiming for flexibility, acceptance, gratitude, appreciation, compassion, and what I would call adaptive humility, which is that I'm a human being. I'm not entitled to the best. I make mistakes. I'm going to be forgiving. I'm going to be flexible. And so when we think about regret, Jason, we actually think about how we live our lives in general. Do we live our lives always demanding more, never satisfied? One area of research that's emerged in recent years is on contentment. How often do you see an ad for a product on television or on streaming or Google or whatever that actually says, well, this will help you be very contented, finding a simpler way of life where you need less. Our culture is based on creating and reinforcing false needs. So I need the most recent iPhone, the most recent technology, the most advanced car or whatever. No, I don't. What I need to do is I need to learn to be contented with things. And nobody ever says what I really regret is being contented with the things in my life and the people in my life, including myself. I once asked a very successful medical professional, can you remember an experience in your life when you just felt this contentment, like, oh, this feels really good? He said, yeah, I remember he was in medical school in the Midwest. And he said, near the campus, there was this pond and there were these ducks on the pond. And I remember sitting with my friends this afternoon. It was warm and sunny, and we were looking at the ducks. And he said that was a really good feeling of contentment. So that became his duck contentment image, something to aim for.
Mm-hmm. Man, you unpacked a lot of massive, important principles in that segment of the podcast. And I use these principles on a daily basis for people that are having a hard time finding happiness in their life. And one thing that I really appreciate, and I think is part of your brilliance, is that you're not scared to check out other fields to see what they have found to implement it into therapy, like looking at economic behaviorism in order to see maximizers and satisfiers, and say, well, how does that apply to mental health? And I that's one thing that I've always appreciated and loved about your work. But just to review some of these principles, because they all go together. Maximizers are people that feel like they could get the best of everything. And by trying to get the best of everything, they can't achieve it, which ends up creating their own misery. Right. Where satisfiers say it needs to be good or great enough. And if I could get that, I'll be happy. But the drive of the maximizers, number one, they fill up their days trying to do everything to the best so they can't enjoy themselves. And then they're always falling short of their expectations, which just cycles into their daily misery. And then spending time to find your happiness for today. What is good about today? What have I achieved? What can I be happy about? What can I appreciate? Is almost more powerful as what do I want to achieve for tomorrow to make my future happiness? And we find a lot of people out of balance between happiness for today and happiness for tomorrow. Right. And regret very easily plays into all this, because these maximizers are worried they're going to regret what's going to happen if they don't do it to their best or obtain everything they want, from this false sense that I can achieve this pure happiness.
Yeah, I think that the Satisfier can have healthy high standards, have adaptive high standards. Like, you don't have to say, well, I'll be satisfied with 0. You could be satisfied with very good. You could be satisfied with, doing better than you've done before. But if you think about like the issue of satisfying, what some people will say, well, I don't want to be satisfied because then I'll lose my edge. I'll lose my motivation. I'll lose my desire to strive.
Hear that all the time.
Right. What I know with anything I write or anything I say, or anything anybody else writes or anybody else says, there's going to be somebody out there who's not going to like it. I can absolutely guarantee, you know. And so what I've done,
Mm-hmm.
I've taken this sort of satisfying approach in writing. I'm going to write something that I want to read. I'm writing I wrote a book that I would want to read. I would want to learn about that and learn about it. Are there other things that people could say about it, or is there an area of research that I have not mentioned? Of course, you're not writing a 75 volume book on regret that nobody would read. So anything you do is going to be open to the dissatisfaction of other people. It's going to be imperfect. And one concept that I've used in my writing and in my personal life is what I call successful imperfection. So, successful imperfection is to make progress doing things imperfectly. So, I'm not going to do an Olympic exercise like you might, but I'm going to do a reasonable exercise, but I'm going to do it on almost a daily basis. And so, I'm going to be successfully making gradual steps imperfectly toward my goal. And the outcome in terms of the writing or whatever I say or do is I'm going to accept that there are things that could be said that I didn't say. Now the maximizer, I remember talking to one of my editors about somebody who had been very late on getting a book finished, and I said, "Gee, I thought this person wanted to write a book." He said, "A lot of people say they want to write a book. What they really should say is, I wish I had written a book." And one thing that gets in the way of very, very conscientious people in writing or in other areas of their life is this perfectionism. Oh, I don't want to, submit this, or I don't want to give this talk, or I don't want to, do this thing because it's not perfect. There's still something left to do. And so this is part of the fear of regret in the future, that if I do something and it's not completely finished, it's not completely perfect, I'll be thinking, oh, it's unfinished. Here's my view, Jason. Everything in life is unfinished. I mean, if I said to you, okay, I'm finished, I'm going to drop dead right now, that wouldn't be a good outcome. So people who worry, or people who fear regret, or people who experience regret about the past think, oh, this thing was unfinished, it's incomplete. So what? So what, it's incomplete? That may be progress over what you had before. It may be useful. It may be a contribution. But this fear of incompleteness, it's called the Zeigarnik effect in perception and cognitive psychology, goes back to the 1920s, that we tend to think, oh, it's incomplete. I've got to get it done. And so I regret it. And that underlies worry, it underlies regret, it underlies a lot of anxiety, incomplete, like I don't know, or something is left undone. It's like the idea of unfinished business. Somebody said to me in giving a workshop recently, how about the regrets of somebody who's, on the verge of dying, regret that they feel guilty that they didn't say, I love you, to somebody who's no longer there. Well, if they're no longer there, you can't say you love them. And so, she said, well, when we go to our grave, shouldn't we go to our grave with no regrets? Now, this is like a existential perfectionism. I'm going to go to my grave thinking I've closed up all the accounts of my life and, said I'm sorry to all the people I hurt in my life. That's absurd. Right? Where's the rule that you have to have closure on the moment of your death? You're going to die, So my view is that regrets are like the background noise, like you heard background noise outside my window here early in the interview. Background noise is part of life. Regrets are part of life. Let them be there. It's like, the traffic in New York City. There's a trade-off. If you're going to live in New York City, you're going to hear background noise.
I think one thing that we probably both see in our practice, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that people that are scared of regretting their mistakes or mistakes they're going to make spend a lot of time pre-processing and thinking and thinking and thinking before they take action because they want to increase the certainty of not making the
Yeah.
mistake and not having that regret. And that amount
Yeah.
of time of indecision or inaction ends up being more hurtful than actually maybe a trial and error of having a reasonably good hypothesis of how it's going to turn out, how it should go, and then employing it and then learning from the success or failure of the behavior.
Well, it's a matter of balance. So, for example,
Yes.
let's take a guy who, 35 years old, and has been with a woman for several years, lived with her, uh, and she seems to be, quite a high quality person. And his thought is that uh, I'm not completely sure. I'm ambivalent, uh, and what if somebody else comes along that's better, or it's not exactly what I want, and so you know a lot of people think that I can't make a decision if I'm ambivalent. The word decision in Latin means to cut away from, which means by definition you are ambivalent. And so you're making a decision to do this or do that. Um, so the idea, if the point that this person makes, a lot of people make about ambivalence, the fear of ambivalence is a bad emotion as opposed to ambivalence is realistic thinking. And so my comment was, of course you're ambivalent. The reason you're ambivalent is that you know each other. I mean, if you first meet somebody and you idealize them like Romeo and Juliet, a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, 4 days is the Romeo and Juliet play, and 8 people or more are killed, including Romeo and Juliet, all because they saw each other at a party and they immediately fell in love and idealized each other. There was no ambivalence with Romeo and Juliet. And in fact, some people during that time actually thought that Shakespeare's point was to actually make fun of this kind of idealized, intense, overly romanticized infatuation. Because maybe what they should have done is they should have thought, let's get to know each other for a while before we get married and then commit suicide. Why don't we give it 6 months and see if we still love each other? So ambivalence can be simply collecting information where you look at the pros and cons. Like if you think about, should I live in New York, or should I live in California or Florida or Connecticut, whatever it is? Each one you're going to have trade-offs. So finding ambivalence is something where, well, it's something that comes with any thoughtful decision. Sometimes, if I weigh the pros and cons for too long a period of time, like this young man, if he waits another year, the girlfriend may just leave him. She might say, "Well, if you can't make a decision after X number of years, I don't want to be with you." So she may make a decision to break off with him. Here's the point: if you keep waiting, you suffer what we call opportunity costs. The opportunity to pursue another relationship, or the opportunity to get closure and move forward with this current relationship. So we always have to think like if I am looking around for the perfect partner, the perfect job, what is the cost of searching? The cost of searching is that I don't move forward on this, or I don't move forward on the alternative. And it can take me a long period of time to pursue those options. So it's always about optionality, or, moving forward, staying. Each one has a cost, and time is a cost. And we have to think about time factors if we keep putting off decisions. You don't have an infinite amount of time.
So you brought up the principle here of opportunity cost. So I just want to take a step back just to reorient people. So looking at regret, there's the process of doing an action and looking at the regret in order to learn something. Here we're talking about fear of regret preventing us from healthily moving forward. So, one thing that Bob had talked about before was over predicting regret, that people assume that they're going to have a lot more regrets, which keep them stuck. He just talked about importance of opportunity cost. What about sunk cost? Because that's something you also talk a
Ah,
lot as
I
well. And,
love the
and, and
sunk
orient
costs.
the listener to that, please, because I don't think everybody knows that
Okay, absolutely.
that business principle.
Right, right. Yeah, I love the idea of sunk costs. Everybody knows what a sunk cost is, and here's the example. You go to your favorite store, which now is online, and you spend a lot of money. You buy a new jacket, a new dress, a new outfit, whatever it is. You take it home, you try it on, and maybe you wear it once, and then you put it back in the closet, and it's sitting in the closet for 5 years. But every 3 months, you take it out and you look at it. No, it's not really me. I'll put it back in. So it's sitting there for 5 years. And your partner says, gee, why don't you throw out that or give away that garment? You never wear it. And you say, no, I spent good money on it and I'll wear it some point. Or let's say you're pursuing a relationship, like there's somebody involved with a married man. She's pursuing a relationship and she's in the relationship for 3 years and he's never going to leave his wife. She's getting more and more miserable. And she says, no, I can't walk away from it. I put 3 years into the relationship. And then she comes up with all these reasons why it could work out. So the reason we call it a sunk cost is that you've already put the cost in. You've already put the investment in. You already bought the jacket. You already bought the dress. You already put the 3 years into the relationship, 3 years into that course of study. The question is about future utility. Is that relationship really going to be positive in the future? Is that job going to be positive in the future? Are you going to wear that jacket? Are you going to wear that dress? And what we tend to do is we tend to stick with something because we've already put an investment in it. Oh, I can't throw out that jacket because I spend a lot of money on it. And so what underlies this is that it's regret, is that we anticipate we're going to regret throwing it out or walking away from it. And why do we do? Now, here's an interesting thing. Humans are the only animals who have sunk costs. Rats or pigeons, cats or dogs, you stop reinforcing them, they stop behaving. They say, hey, no more food, I'm going somewhere else. They don't sit there and try to justify picking the green button. They're not reflecting on themselves. They're not thinking, I have to make sense of my past behavior. But we, because we're humans and we reflect on what we do, we want to think we're good decision makers. We get hijacked by a sunk cost. And you can see it. Immediately you can see it in yourself or other people. Should I remember a couple of years ago was getting computers for all my staff. And I had this crappy old computer. And I'm thinking, oh, I can still use this computer. I can still use this computer. I began thinking, why am I sitting here with a crappy computer? Why don't I get a new Mac? And so I decided, all right, so I'm going to, erase the hard drive, get rid of the computer, sunk costs, it's in the past, move on, get a new Mac or a new computer. Why do we get stuck in sunk costs? One is we have a fear of wasting. So if I said to you, Jason, here's $100 bill, what I'd like to do is to burn money in front of people. You probably would think I'm crazy, and you might actually be annoyed with me. Don't waste that money. I could use it or give it to a poor person or whatever. Say, no, I'd like burning. Nobody's worse off by virtue of my burning the money. But we can't stand the idea of wasting. Finish all the food on your plate. No, you can't waste that food. Don't throw that out. You can't waste that food. I can't throw out any of my books because I might want to read them again. Yeah, likely. Really, if I already read them, I'll never read them again. So, but we have that fear of wasting, and we think that we're going to regret it. That's why people hoard. Sunk cost is like hoarding your past behavior. I hold on to it, it'll come back, it'll be more useful. I'll regret it. I'll think back, oh, I should have stayed. It could have worked out, and all of that. So how do we break free of sunk costs? Once, identify it as a sunk cost. I think all your listeners now know, they know what sunk costs are. The second is, if I had to do it over again, would I make the same decision? Would I go out and, if I lost that jacket, would I go out and buy it again? If the answer is no, then maybe you should get rid of it. The third thing is, am I missing opportunities by holding on to that sunk cost? If I stay in that relationship or stay in the dead-end job, am I missing other opportunities because I'm hijacked or stuck by the sunk cost or anchored by the sunk cost? And we can think about, what advice would I give somebody else? So we're very good at advising somebody else, hey, walk away from it. It's no longer useful. The relationship's not working out. There are better opportunities. Why do we do that with other people, but we don't do it with ourselves? Because we want to justify our own behavior. And it's part of cognitive dissonance in a way. We want to justify what we've done, think of ourselves as good decision makers. And finally, good decision makers know when to cut their losses. I've had a lot of patients who are very successful investors, and what they do is they cut their losses. They simply say, well, I'm going to cut my losses here. I put a stop loss order in. So putting a stop loss order in may be a good way of avoiding regrets, but we tend to think, oh, if it comes back, then I'll regret it. You could, but you could also feel free that I walked away from it, I pursued new options, and I don't have to keep justifying a bad decision.
Staying invested and investing more in something that is not a good investment because I have put a certain degree of investment in the past is not a great idea. Because investing more in a bad investment is still a bad investment, no matter how much you have put in it in the past. So we have those folks. What about the people that say, I just don't feel ready yet to make this decision. I need to feel right. I need to feel ready to do it.
Yeah. So this is the readiness illusion, that I have to feel ready. I have to feel ready to exercise, ready to work on my my homework, ready to end the relationship, ready to be assertive, whatever. And this is kind of like an emotional reasoning. I need to have this feeling in order to do it. So it's making my decisions based on a feeling I have. An alternative is to make a decision based on my goals. So if I want to get into shape, or I want to lose weight, or I want to get my cholesterol down, or whatever it is, my goal is healthy markers. That's my goal. The question is, what do I have to do to achieve that goal? I have to exercise, watch my diet, whatever, take medication, whatever the doctor prescribes. The goal is what determines the behavior, not the way I feel. So the readiness thing might be, well, I don't feel ready to exercise, or I don't feel ready to diet, or I don't feel ready to say that to somebody. And the problem with that is that it anchors you to an emotion and it ignores your goal. Your decision should be based on your goals, not on your feeling. So let's say, for example, if I'm in New York and you see me standing, my office is on East 58th Street, and you see me walking up and down East 58th Street, looking back and forth. It's actually a one-way street. But you see me looking back and forth. And you say, Bob, what are you doing? What are you looking for? And I say, Jason, I'm waiting for my motivation to show up, and then I'll go into my office. All right? You would think I'm a complete lunatic, and you'd probably be right. But, you make a decision based on the goals and on your values, not on feeling ready. People with obsessive compulsive disorder, how do you know you've washed your hands long enough? And people say, oh, I have that feeling of completion. I've completed it. I've washed my hands for 10 minutes. So now I feel completed. The problem with waiting for the feeling of completion is that you'll have OCD for the rest of your life. And what you have to learn to do is to wash your hands, to the length of singing Happy Birthday, 90 seconds or whatever, and then stop. In other words, don't wait for the feeling of completion. Have a rule that you're going to stop here. Readiness demands it's one of the great illusions I think actually evolved from psychoanalysis. You have to feel ready to make a change. The answer really is you have to be clear about your goals. You have to be clear about what you're willing to invest, and you have to be willing to make a decision. It's not about the way you feel ready or feel comfortable or not ambivalent. That is going to keep you stuck, and ultimately you might regret not making a decision. I mean, depression, from the behavioral point of view, as you know, Jason, is based on passivity and avoidance. That sounds like somebody who's afraid of regretting things.
So before we wrap up, and it's my fault. I derailed you in the beginning of the conversation. So I think you did a beautiful job here talking about being stuck because of fear of regret. But if we could just spend just a few minutes talking about I'm stuck in regret. I'm feeling a lot of regret now, rather of what I did in the past. How do we get people? How do we get people unstuck when they're stuck in their regret?
Right. Well, there are a lot of things that we could do, but just to give you a few pointers, one thing is to label it as regret. I'm regretting it. The second is to ask myself, is this regret going to be productive or is it unproductive? So productive regret would be, what is the take-home message to improve my behavior in the future? What did I learn from this? Is there something I can do today to make progress? Is there a plan to use my experience to become a better person? Never waste a good mistake. That would be productive regret. The unproductive regret is to say to myself, am I just dwelling on it over and over, coming up with the same thing over and over and criticizing myself? So if it's unproductive, then I say to myself, should I engage in self-correction? Like learning from it, do something different in the future? Or am I engaged in self-criticism? If I'm engaged in self-criticism, how is that going to help me? Would I advise my best friend to continue criticizing themselves? Am I exaggerating how much I thought I knew when I made the decision? Because a lot of times we tend to think that we knew everything when we made the decision. I make a decision in real time with limited information under conditions of uncertainty. So if I made the decision in that way, like everybody, so the outcome could be either way. Did I really control everything? Can I make the best of what I have? So if you haven't married the perfect partner, or you don't have the perfect job, or don't have the perfect home, or whatever it is, you might think about, well, how can I make the best of it? How can I appreciate it? How can I be grateful? How can I work on this? How can I build on it? The other thing is, am I idealizing the alternative? So a lot of times what people do when they regret, they think, oh, if I had married somebody else or pursued a different job, I would be so happy. There are times when I was in high school, everybody thought I'd be a lawyer because I like arguing. And so, so when I see my high school people at reunions, someone who haven't seen me since high school, oh, Bob, are you a lawyer now? I say, absolutely not. And I'm not a defendant either, but I became a psychologist. And then sometimes I think, gee, I wonder if I should have become a lawyer, And then I think, no, I don't think so. I think, I could idealize being a lawyer and prosecuting the guilty or defending the innocent, but I don't think that would be as ideal as my imagination says it is. The other thing in terms of the rumination, and each of these things I discuss in the book, If Only, Finding Freedom from Regret, is that people who regret in the way you described, Jason, are ruminating. And, looking for the answer, looking for closure, looking for clarification. You're never going to get complete clarification because you're never going to get all the facts, and you don't need all the facts. You just need to make your life better in the future. So the way to deal with rumination is to ask yourself, is there anything I'm going to get from dwelling on this in the future? Second, what if I accepted that I made a decision that wasn't the perfect outcome? I just accepted it. What if I'm willing to accept uncertainty? What if I'm willing to focus on committing to making my life better and the various ways which you can always work on to make your life better? I assign people rumination time. Set aside 20 minutes in the afternoon to ruminate, and then write down any ruminations you have about your regret at any other time, and then at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sit down and ruminate, and then ask yourself, is this going to help? Is this unproductive? Is this simply going over the same thing? Should I just simply accept? I can accept I don't have a perfect life. I don't need existential perfectionism. I should aim for contentment, appreciation, gratitude. Many people have it worse. So there are a lot of things that we can do with this sort of post-decision regret. But keep in mind, Jason, that there are people who could be regretting for 10, 20, 30, 40 years about the same thing. And then your question is, what am I missing if I spend my life regretting? Sometimes we need to say our life is a series of chapters. So I made that decision, 5 years ago. That chapter is finished. I'm starting a new chapter, and I'm going to be the author of that chapter. And I'm going to try to write the best chapter I can within the limitations of living a life. I'm going to write a chapter living a good life that's imperfect.
Mm. And for some people, the impact on them might not be strong enough. So one thing to also, and correct me if I'm wrong, is consider the impact on people that you really do care about, whether it's your spouse, your kids, if you're a teacher, it might be your students or whoever, your coworkers, people that matter to you. How is me being stuck in this regret and me not living life even with is impacting the people that I really care about? Because that can be very powerful as well, I think.
It's never too late to apologize and ask for forgiveness. But even if there's no way that you could get forgiveness from the person because they don't want to give you forgiveness or they're no longer around, is that you can forgive yourself. And forgiving yourself doesn't mean, oh, what I did was okay. It means, I got to own up to it. I did a stupid thing or an unkind thing. I'm an imperfect person. And I feel bad about it. And I'm going to use that bad feeling as a moment in time to convince myself to be a better person in the next moment in time. I've made a lot of mistakes, said things that I wish I never said, that kind of thing. But if I can own up, and I'm not saying I do this all the time or even enough, but if I can apologize and if I can practice what I would call adaptive humility, that yes, I'm a human being. I made mistakes. I'm very sorry. You deserve better treatment. That's going to help you move forward. Owning up to a mistake is not the same thing as spending all your time regretting it. It's using that mistake to make myself a better person, to apologize to the people, to ask forgiveness, and to understand that in the real world, Jason, we're all fallen angels. We're not these perfect, angelic, fictional people. We're people who make mistakes, who do things we shouldn't do. But we can put it in perspective and not define ourselves by a mistake. It's kind of like if you think of your whole life as a pie chart, like a circle with different pieces and stuff. And let's say that regret is a small piece in that pie. Don't make the mistake of defining yourself by that small piece. Take that piece out. Like you can see all these books on the bookshelves back here. You could take you can take the books out, including this, the If Only book, This could be your regret. And you can say, yeah, I regret that. And now I'm going to put it back on the shelf. And now I'm going to get on in my life. That's a way of using a regret, acknowledging it, noticing it, put it in perspective, humanizing it, and then writing the next chapter. And you're the author.
Okay, so I think I drilled you on regret, this book, your theory on it. But is there anything that I missed that you think that people should know about regret?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have what I call the pure mind thing. Like, will this book help me, or will these ideas help me to never have any regrets? Right? If I said to you, I'm going to promise you sunny days every day for the rest of your life, you know I'm lying. Even if you move to sunny California, you're going to have rain, right? I'm not saying you won't have regrets, but what I hope is that you don't get hijacked by them. You don't get anchored by them. You don't define yourself by them, that you're able to step away from them and you're able to say, I'm going to move through my life and I'll have these regrets in the background, things I may have said or done, to remind myself of the kind of things I'm capable of, that I'm an imperfect person who, we all have a dark side. It's like people talk about the higher and lower self. I don't believe that. I believe it's the self. We have dark sides and bright sides. We have complicated, confusing sides, and it's changing day to day. So this is not going to be, you'll never have a regret, but put the regrets over here, put the book back on the shelf, and move forward in your life. When you take the book down, you say, what did I learn from this? What did I learn from that regret? And how can I make myself a better person? And if I practice adaptive humility, which allows you to accept that you've made mistakes, you're not going to get hijacked. You're not going to think, I should never make a mistake. You should make mistakes. I mean, if you think you're going to live a life without regret, you won't live a life. It's like you're not going to be able to swim without getting wet. It's not going to happen. I hope you don't regret having me on, Jason.
Oh, no. I absolutely do not regret having you on. I've actually been excited for you to come on the show one day. I regret not having you on sooner, but I'll handle that after the show. So for all the therapists that are listening right now, do you feel like they should acknowledge to their clients that they've, maybe not go into detail, but that they've have regrets, that, I've hurt people, I haven't been my best selves, I made mistakes, and nobody's perfect. Do you feel like that's a powerful thing to do?
Yeah, I think it's up to the clinician and what they feel comfortable with. But, I think that in therapy, you can become a role model to some extent. And the role model, a lot of times patients or clients are going to idealize us. Oh, you have it all together. Your life is on top. You're never unhappy, whatever. And, in my books, like in my book, Anxiety Free, that I published a few years ago, I acknowledge that, earlier on, I had panic attacks. I felt like I was going to faint, which really got me interested in panic disorder, or getting depressed over a breakup in a relationship many years ago when I was single, or recognizing that I'm human. I'll tell the patient that I have regrets, I've made mistakes, and something, I'm going to make mistakes in the future. And why? Because I don't have perfect information, because I'm human, and because I want to live a full life. And a full life includes mistakes.
Yes, sir.
And if you're willing to make mistakes, you're willing to take chances. Making mistakes is the cost of making progress.
Mm-hmm. And one last point for me is that mistakes don't always lead to mistakes. Way leads on to way. So you can make a mistake, make another mistake, and then make a decision that was really helpful in your life. But had you
Yeah.
not made those two mistakes, you wouldn't have gotten to the point. And the other way too, when you actually have a success doesn't always lead to success.
Right.
A
Yeah.
success could then lead to success. That could
Yeah.
then lead
Yeah.
to a mistake. So
Yeah.
I think people get stuck that a mistake leads always to a bad outcome. Nope, a mistake could lead you to a great
Right.
outcome. I
Yeah. That's an excellent
uh,
point.
Okay, so I'm sure people want to buy this book after hearing all the great information and hearing what else is in there. So, where again, what's the name of the book, and where can they find this book?
So the book is called "If Only: Finding Freedom from Regret," and published by Guilford. That's published a lot of my clinical books, and you could get it at a bookstore or on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Walmart online. Um, it's paperback and ebook, and there's audio book coming out in a couple of months. So, but I think it's the kind of what I hope it's the kind of book that will help normalize what you're going through, help you understand why regret is there, help you find some tools to be able to step away from the regret and sometimes use it and sometimes balance it and even help you make better decisions so you have less to regret in the future. Uh, I hope it helps people accomplish those goals.
Well, I mean, we know that your other books have, and I just because there's such a gold of resources, maybe we can mention a few more, like the Worry Cure, Beating the Blues. Whether you're a clinician trying to learn CBT or just treat people with anxiety and depression, or you're a patient, those books are absolutely fantastic. Out of,
Thank
I
you,
think you said
Jason.
28 or 29 books that you have written. So definitely take a look at the large repertoire of what Bob put out there, because you will not be sorry reading his work. And if people want to follow you, keep up with you, see what you're up to next, how can they, is there a social media page, a website, or anything that they could do to track
Yeah,
to
so
track what
if
you're?
you could Google my name, I have an institute in New York, the American Institute for Cognitive Therapy, and our website is cognitivetherapinyc.com. You can also go to my author's page on Amazon.com. I have a Psychology Today blog. But, it's, you know, looking at our emotions as there for a reason, that we don't have to feel good all the time. And unpleasant emotions and painful emotions will tell you something about what you need or may tell you that something's gone wrong. They're there because they help us. Try to make it useful. You're not going to get rid of regrets, but you could make better use of them. You could make better decisions if you anticipate things, and you don't have to get hijacked or stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, I play a game with clients and I say, you name an emotion and I'll tell you why we have it. Stump me. Try and stump me and name an emotion that's not useful. And every single emotion
Exactly.
is useful.
Yeah.
And if it's used
Yeah.
correctly, like regret, it could be a very powerful tool to enhance your life.
Yeah, I
So
definitely
don't hate
think that's true.
regret. Learn how to
Right.
use it effectively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Bob, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know you're a busy guy. I'm sure the audience is going to absolutely take away huge takeaways from our conversation. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Jason. And it's good to see you again. You take care of yourself.